Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I guess good morning from those calling out west. I am Kate Kramer, the Deputy Executive Director at Advanced CTE, and really excited to have you all join today's webinar on CTE's role in the future of work and our economic recovery. Oh, and there we go. Technology. I am really excited to be joined today by Dr. Nicole Smith, the research professor and chief economist at Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. Unfortunately, our second speaker, Wendy Sastrom of the SHRM Foundation, had to cancel at the last minute. We're working with her to figure out the best way to get the amazing data that we had a chance to preview in the slides, to get that so we can share it back out with you and the rest of the field. So stay tuned for more information on that. But I'm still confident we're going to have a wonderful conversation today. So just before I turn it over to Nicole to really dig in, just wanted to provide a little bit of framing to kick off the conversation. As we all know, COVID-19 or coronavirus has greatly impacted our workforce and our economic opportunities for many Americans. Job losses were staggering in the first few months of the pandemic, and there is still a lot of uncertainty about everything, but certainly about what the future of jobs and the future of work looks like. As we can see, between 30 and 40% of job losses might be permanent. Employers are still trying to figure out what jobs will come back and what those jobs will look like when they come back, which may look dramatically different than they did pre-March 2020. And as we saw in the last recession about a decade ago, in the Great Recession, youth and young adults have been particularly impacted. This is not a surprise. As I said, we saw this 12 years ago in the Great Recession. There are a number of reasons for it in terms of when jobs are fewer and far between, prioritized for adults, for older people might stay in the workforce longer. There's already hesitancy working with youth and teenagers. But it certainly has a great impact, and we've certainly seen the impact that the Great Recession has had on the millennial generation today in terms of their buying power, their ability to have mortgages, to have savings, and the debt that they're still saddled with. Unfortunately, and again, not surprisingly, Black and Latinx youth are more likely to be negatively impacted by economic downturns. When you look at the unemployment rate, it is significantly higher, particularly for Black young adults, and a little bit higher for Latinx young adults compared to white young adults. We haven't seen the unemployment rate for over 70 years hit this high for this group. The next highest rate we saw was, again, about 11 years ago under the Great Recession. So what does this mean for career technical education? That's what brought all of you to this conversation today. How does CT need to evolve in terms of the programs offered, the skills being taught, the way it's delivered, and how we're ensuring that there's equitable access and success for each and every learner? This is a question that CT has always had to ask and will always need to ask of itself. We have over a 100-year history of evolving to meet industry needs, but the question of what the future of work looks like has been accelerated greatly over the last 6 months. We'll begin to dig into this question today, but I know it'll be one that we as a community continue to grapple with in the months and year ahead, so that we can ensure that CT continues to remain responsive to employers and learners' needs. So with that, actually one last thing. Before I turn over to Nicole, I did want to share a few new resources that Advanced CT has released earlier this month to help our members and other CT advocates position CT as a critical component of our economic recovery. We've released a short video. You can see a snapshot of it there, 2 fact sheets that focus on the importance of secondary as well as post-secondary CT in the economic recovery, and a guide of how to leverage all of these resources that include some talking points, all of which has data behind it. You can find all of these resources at careertech.org/advocate. And with that, thank you, and it's also now been put in the chat box. Thank you very much. So now I'm really excited to turn the microphone, so to speak, over to Nicole to share lessons learned from the last economic downturn and what they might mean for today's economy, learners, and for CT more broadly. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let me try that again. Thank you so very much, Kate, and I am very, very happy to be here. Well, here as in home today. Not really under the circumstances. I mean, we're all experiencing these similar types of challenges. But it's really a pleasure to speak to this group on the issues of, the COVID recovery and implications for jobs and CTE, young adults and Latinx and Black adults, and what some people have been calling opportunity youths. I'm sure you've heard all of these terms before. So I'm going to say a few things that I think, we've been talking about amongst ourselves as economists. So for me, I feel like I've been hearing it a lot over and over again because I have a whole bunch of economists in my circle. But I found that when I speak sometimes to broader groups, some of the things might be new, and wherever that's the case, you feel free to put it in the chat box so I can elaborate and share some additional resources with you. But one of the first things I like to share is this picture. And this is a picture of our current situation in terms of jobs on a monthly basis since March, how many jobs have been lost and how many jobs we've regained, and comparing this recession to 3 previous recessions. So the very first blue line, the line that jumps all the way down, and maybe I should put this in slideshow so you can see it. Maybe that's a better visualization. The very first blue line actually shows you, April, which most of us remember it as losing 20 million jobs in 1 month. And then we jump back up in May, and then we have June, and then we jump back down in July to 1.8 million. So this recession has been phenomenal. And I mean, sadly, as an economist and as a social scientist, you almost look at it and you're marveled by how much we could have actually lost in any particular month. In fact, in order for me to even create this graph, I had to adjust my y-axis because it was impossible for me to simultaneously show 20 million and 1 million, to try to get us all on the same page. So it was pretty difficult to do that initially. But we have this huge jump, and even when compared to the 2008 recession, which then was the Great Recession, the worst recession since the Great Depression, even when we compare the type of losses we experienced in March and April, it still pales in comparison. In that particular recession, one of the worst months we had, we lost 800,000 jobs. Again, comparing that to the 1990 recession or even the 2001 recession, it almost looks as if we were playing, high school games here compared to, the main league that we're in right now. So the duration of the recession in the past has been around 11 to 21 months. And I really like to talk about the duration of recession in terms of jobs, because the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Statistics, is really the organization responsible for defining recessions and recovery. They talk about recessions in terms of GDP. And for the most part, GDP often returns at a much faster rate than jobs. Okay, so those of you who are paying attention to what's going on in the stock market, I mean, if you have any money to invest there, it's been pretty bullish. Everybody's all excited about the stocks. Stocks have been up. If you look at the Dow Jones, pretty positive, just lots of growth, because the stock market is very forward-looking. It's looking ahead in time and trying to figure out where we're going to be in 12 to 24 months from now. And there are lots of positive outcomes from that. So GDP is also, much more forward-looking, I guess, than jobs. And GDP often tends to return at a faster rate. In fact, this is why we in the last 3 years had coined the term the jobless recoveries, because the economic recoveries show the return of GDP, a return of growth, a return of economic activity, but we did not find the commensurate increases in job numbers at the rate in which we had hoped. So that's perhaps one thing that we've learned from the previous recession that we might look forward to, or expect, I should say, instead of looking forward, which is a positive phrase. We could expect another jobless recovery in which GDP will return at a faster rate and you know, for very many months lag behind when the jobs will actually come back. We see again from this particular picture that if we were to even sum over time, over the last few months, how many, the net job losses, we're still in close to about 18 million net jobs lost. So the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, which is a, you know, an independent think tank, bipartisan think tank, has estimated that it won't be until 2029 before we recover all of the jobs that we will continue to lose in this coronavirus recession. So I have to talk about the negative before I can talk about the positive. It won't be until 2029. And, you know, the CBO, IHS Market, which used to be Macro Advisors, the macroeconomic forecasting group for the White House, they have estimated 2030. So it's going to be a while where we will be in these doldrums. It's going to be a significant amount of time before we continue to recover all of the jobs lost. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't any jobs. The jobs will come back. It's just going to take some time. And the jobs that return always look different to the jobs that were lost. And that's the reason why we're here, because we have to better prepare for it. So I have another chart here, which is a sort of predictor chart. And this prediction is based on our analysis of IHS Market. This is the same group of people as, you know, who used to be macro advisors. They used to forecast macro numbers for the White House, and they continue to be one of the premier forecasting groups in the country. And this is a chart that's showing you what their expectations are for both unemployment and GDP. So the orange is the unemployment. They're forecasting our unemployment can get as far as, you know, 20% or even further, 20%. And that's a general rate. I mean, Kate's presentation before sort of looked at youth unemployment. You could expect youth unemployment to be 1.5 to 2 times as high as the national average for everyone else. And if you even break that down by race, then Black and Latinx are almost 3 times as high as young whites. So a rule of thumb would be whatever you see for the national economy, you have to multiply it by 2 or 3 if you're going to look at young opportunity youth. The blue line here is real GDP. And just as we, you know, spoke about, there's often a lag between the return to GDP and return to jobs and employment. So here, just up to 2022, it's going to take us that long to get back to these types of numbers. Probably not till the last quarter in 2021 before we get back to single digits, or 2022 before we get back to single digit unemployment. Okay, so it's going to be a while before we see a return to the type of steady, smooth, positively growing economy that we sort of had become accustomed to for the last 10 years. That, you know, post-Obama was just really, you know, the high life and the highlights, you know, for those that positive decade. So it's going to be a while before we see that again. Just one more slide, which I think will condition our conversation. This is sort of telling us a story about how the economy looks in terms of industry and how the jobs lost look in terms of industry. So if you look at natural resources, construction, manufacturing, that's just, you know, these 13 industries, you'll see that most of the job losses are in leisure and hospitality, okay? So most of us know this. This is restaurants, it's hotels, it's, you know, airlines, you know, nobody's flying as much as they were in the past. A significant fraction of the job losses are there. That's about more than a third, almost 40%. And that particular industry really accounts for 10% of the economy. So you are seeing a disproportionate number of job losses in leisure and hospitality compared to how much jobs leisure and hospitality usually accounts for. If you were to look at government as an example, You know, they've lost much less jobs in government than the fraction of jobs that are in government as a whole. Financial services aren't really doing their shares, 1% of job losses, but 6% of jobs. Wholesale and retail trade, you know, had roughly the same amount, 12 to 14%. This chart is intended to demonstrate two things. First, every single industry was touched by COVID. So COVID job losses, you know, touch everyone across the board, but there are some that are hurt more than others. And we care about the big numbers, and not only do we care about the big numbers, but we care about proportionality. And why does this matter? And again, I'm always going to reach back to Kate's initial unemployment charts of young people and who are unemployed, because the proportions of job losses and is highly correlated with the fact that we see higher amounts of job losses for Black and Latinx youth. Why is that? Because they are disproportionately employed in the industries and sectors that are hard hit. So what COVID has done is it's moved the curtain, and we can see behind the curtain, we can see that it reveals stark differences in employment sectors by race. So we know that, you know, there's some people who are not able to socially distance, who are the frontline workers, who are the workers that actually have to go on or go out there, who the people who are keeping our country safe, or, you know, the cleaners and the people working in healthcare, and who are the frontline staff at our grocery stores, disproportionately low income, disproportionately Black and Latinx, and we find that, you know, disproportionately those are the two groups of people who are at highest risk for positivity with COVID, and also at highest risk for mortality with COVID. COVID has also revealed the people who can continue to work and have Zoom meetings and those that don't. So that's highly correlated with education level. It's highly correlated with, you know, people who have an associate's degree and higher, who are able to be employed in occupations that, you know, allow them to work remotely. So that's a concern. And COVID has also revealed the extent to which, even when it comes to our decisions regarding who, you know, who can go back to school and who can engage in our online courses, significant numbers of Black and Latinx students do not have access to Wi-Fi at home, don't have broadband access to technology at home. And although everyone thinks we've solved the problem by putting all the classes online, what we haven't done is solve the problem for the most vulnerable, because no longer can they go to the library to get access to the internet. No longer can they go to Starbucks to get access to the internet to complete their assignments. Because of COVID and social distancing, you're required to have this at home, and there are disproportionate numbers of students who unfortunately don't have access to that. There was a study that was done recently by, now it just slipped me the group of people who did the study, but what they demonstrated, surprisingly to be, is that broadband access in urban cities and inner cities were substantially lower when compared to broadband access, even in rural America. Because sometimes you think of, you know, broadband access might be a challenge in rural America. It is even more so in certain aspects of the inner city. So multiples of times more so. So we have to really consider, even when we've solved the social distancing problem for students for online access, we have to think about the fact that many of them don't have access to broadband. So back to the economy and what this has been for us in middle skills and CTE, we know that overall the economy has moved towards upskilling. We've had a general decline in manufacturing. We've had the rise of the skilled services sector. over the last 30 or 40 years, the proportion of jobs that require a post-secondary education, and training beyond high school has marched hand in hand in lockstep with the rise in the personal computers. So from about 1980, since personal computers were prolific across all jobs and almost uniformly found in significant amounts of jobs that people do, and redefining the way we do jobs, down to the auto mechanic, he needs to have some sort of understanding of computer technology. We found that there's more and more upskilling of jobs. What this has meant is that where we lost jobs in blue collar, manufacturing, and transportation, we significantly gained in skills services. There were still opportunities in healthcare, still opportunities in leisure, financial, and business, but these opportunities also required more and more post-secondary education. The type of education and training that we need are greater amounts of credentialing, greater amounts of industry-based certifications, certificates, associate's degrees, and bachelor's degrees that were rewarded in the marketplace. Middle skills continues to grow substantially. All of the growth of net new jobs in the non-VA economy has been in middle skills. So we have to be very careful about this middle skills pathway. A lot of the pathway and opportunity for middle skills was found for associate's degrees. So we saw good jobs for workers with associate's degrees grew by 83%. And this particular report that I'm citing is work that we did at the center, where we defined a good job as between $35,000 upwards of $35,000, $45,000 as an entry-level position, depending on where you started, and in some cases, $55,000 and $65,000 for adults who've had a few years of experience on the job. So for those types of good jobs, there were significant opportunities, especially for people who had associate's degrees. I like to talk about this particular chart, and this again looks at the entire US economy from the perspective of occupations. So we have jobs in education, in STEM, in community and social services, in managerial and healthcare, sales, food, healthcare support, and blue collar. This is the entire US economy in terms of occupation. So every single bar is an occupation. And each color on the bar represents for that occupation what fraction of the jobs are bachelor's degree or higher, which is blue, what fraction of the jobs are middle skills, which is tan, and what fractions of the jobs are high school or less, which is brown. This chart tells us again that those middle skills jobs are found throughout the economy. You have middle skills opportunities in education, in STEM, in community services and arts, managerial, healthcare, sales and office support, food, healthcare support, as well as blue collar. So there are middle skills opportunities everywhere and blue collar opportunity everywhere. And we can find across the board increasing compensation and wages for people who have more and more education, more and more skills in those occupations. So for any type of occupation here that has a significant fraction of VA and above, there are huge rewards to those middle skill workers in those particular occupations who then later go on to obtain some type of VA and above. So it's really important for us to understand that we're not necessarily always talking about blue collar and skills trades economy. We talk about middle skills. We're talking about across the board healthcare professional opportunities as well that pay well with some type of sub-VA credential. Automation and AI have heightened the demand for skills and education in this new economy. And here, this is some of the work we've done trying to forecast jobs and opportunity to 2027. We're actually going to update this to 2030 post-COVID because we suspect that some of the numbers will actually, be reflective of even higher education demand post-COVID. But again, since the 1970s, the fraction of the economy that creates jobs for those who are post high school has significantly increased and continues to increase. We know the economy requires more jobs. The economy requires more education beyond high school to get those jobs. We know that our students have to go to post-secondary institutions in order to get that education. But we still have a concern of selectivity favoring white students much more so than students of color. And this is a report that we worked on at the center that says, you know, for the last 20 or 30 years, the majority of new white college freshman enrollment go to the 468 most selective four-year colleges and universities in the United States. And when you look at where the enrollments are for Hispanic and African American and Black students, Latinx students, those enrollments are going to the open access schools. So why do we care about this? Because first of all, this isn't forced enrollment. This is no longer a case where, you know, you're being turned away from a particular location because they're not providing access for you. This is a system where people are making the decisions that they want to go to these institutions. But when individuals of color, or Latinx and Black students of color go to open enrollment and access schools where resources are less, then it compounds the problems of completion for those institutions, and it makes it much more difficult for those students to actually complete on time or not necessarily rack up as much loans as they would have had they gone somewhere else. So our concern is this, you know, this selective, separate and unequal type of outcome that we get from having students of color go disproportionately to open access schools, even those who might be much more prepared for schools that are much more selective. So this is a concern, especially where some of the open access schools might, you know, disproportionately offer only AAs or certificates and not necessarily take them to the BA. So we really want to highlight that even where we might encourage students to first start off with a certificate of certification, some type of post-secondary education like that, we're not necessarily closing doors to getting additional training where possible. And I'm going to just say, you know, so this is more of the same, that we have blue collar is transforming, the way that blue collar is transformed, you know, the United States is becoming much more upskilled. We think of the new version of manufacturing as being advanced manufacturing. It's require more and more post-secondary. No matter what, we have to talk to our students about the fact that if they plan to get those good jobs, they're going to have to train for those good jobs because those jobs are requiring more now than they did in the past. So where are the industries and occupations for the non-BA good jobs? There are many of them in natural resources still. There are many of them in transportation, construction, public admin, manufacturing. And then we have the top 5 occupations in construction, transportation. This is just telling us where are the industries, where are the occupations. What you should take away from this is that a lot of these industries and occupations disproportionately serve males, disproportionately serve young men. And so we might have some amount of gender bias in where the non-BA good jobs land young women. So we are concerned about, you know, for young women who choose to not pursue a BA for whatever reason, or might, you know, be much more interested in sub-BA credentials, where are the job opportunities for them that have good pay? That's also a concern. Who's winning? Online retailers. Anyone who's paid attention to, you know, where the money was in the last 2 or 3 months knows that Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Alphabet, Zoom have been doing really well. Retailers, supermarkets, anybody who's manufacturing, PPE, janitorial services, big pharma, healthcare, those are the winners. And those are where we might want to focus our resources in the next, 2 or 3 years, because that's where the money is at, and that's where the opportunity is at in the near future. So if I had, to talk to my nieces and nephews, as I've been doing most recently about, and they're thinking of their career over the next 2 or 3 years, this coronavirus epidemic, and after it's over, I'm also talking to them about where we expect, the biggest amount of growth to take place. So my conclusions are: increasing cost of college still leads to an equal access to educational attainment. We have a wide array of types of careers for workers without a BA to enter the middle class. A disproportionate number of them tend to serve young men, so we have to pay attention to that for young women. We must promote access to good jobs by strengthening any connections between school and work, to make sure that we talk about what those connections are. We build those connections out, and we make sure that people sort of know what their pathways are before they even start. And we can achieve that by encouraging transparency of knowing the economic value of non-VA programs. People need to know, if you were to take this particular program and you look like me and you have this potential and this particular credential, what would you look like in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years in terms of what you can make, what you can earn, and what you can end up. So thank you for your time, and I'm here for questions if you have them.
Great, thank you, Nicole. That was a lot of very rich data, a lot to circle back on. Please, if people have questions, I encourage you to use the chat and add those in, and we'll kind of attend them over time. Before I turn to that, I want to ask one question. I want to kind of bring it back to the kind of thesis question about what does this mean for CTE. I think you provided a lot of information about how sectors are being impacted right now in the short term, kind of the longer term trends towards more middle skill, towards more education, more skills, more credentials being valued, and that's not really being shaken, but obviously where we focus our efforts might be a little bit off. So just kind of curious, when you think about the programs, the pathways, or the skills, right, the specific competencies that we should really be ensuring that we attend to, that we focus on within our existing or programs that are being developed, kind of where do you kind of recommend, where do you say these are really the competencies, these are to make sure that we are continuing to ride the wave of the future of work, of automation, of looking at the trends that we've seen, some of which we expect to continue even after we have a vaccine and people can go back to work in more traditional ways. I think there are going to be some changes to our workplaces that just persist. So just kind of curious, from, you can use the data or you can use your own opinions based on the data, but what does this really mean for our programs, for which ones we offer and what they really look like?
So one of my concerns here is that we often are using some of these short-term indicators to tell us something about what we're going to do long-term. I don't think that any of the if you looked at the industries and the sectors that I spoke about, we found that there were opportunities across the board. And many of the CTE programs that we engage in will still exist over the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm not necessarily advocating, because of coronavirus or because of the changes that we're observing now, that we make vast improvements or actually cut off the programs. What I am advocating is that we recognize that based on the previous recessions, the two things have been true. One, that once employers and employment return, they tend to prefer physical credentials. They want evidence of that competency. And those credentials, they show themselves off in terms of what they're requesting on the job description. what types of certificates, certifications, programs, licenses, those reveal themselves in the job description. So we know that much more right after the recession, more often than not, you see a lot of people, a lot of employers requesting significant amounts of certificates and certification to get jobs which they didn't request in the past. So we almost have an employer's market, and they are taking advantage of that by getting people who are much more qualified sometimes for the job than they ordinarily would have. The shortcoming of that from the employer's perspective is that you can spend a lot of time training an individual to the requirements of your specific job, and the moment the economy starts doing better, which it will in a year or two, you can lose that person. So there's incentives to make sure you get the right fit and not necessarily find somebody who's overqualified, who's always looking for something else. So one concern is always make sure that we are on the mark with respect to the licenses in play, the certificates in play, the certifications in play, so that our students can hit the ground running once they graduate and make sure that they can get those jobs that are there. I think I'm also concerned about ensuring that while students are enrolled in programs now, that they can still have the types of internship experiences that place them at an advantage once they left the job. And that's really going to be a challenge for us now, post-coronavirus. How do we make sure that they get those types of internships? Because I have many examples of experiences, of research that we've done that shows that the students who not only graduate at the top of the class with their certificates and certifications, but those who have the real life experience from an internship are the ones that are most successful. And if we're really talking about ways in which we're helping opportunity youth, we have to make sure that we can still connect them to those internship opportunities. I just don't know how we do that in Corona 19, 2021. I just don't understand how we do that, but that is really going to be one of the largest challenges for us, I believe.
Great. I think a lot to unpack, a lot of great information. I think your earlier point responding to my question was a great one. I think that's a challenge that CTE programs often have, is hearing the immediate short term, we need this right now, make this change right now, and recognizing that we're an education program. And so it's not just about short term in demand needs, it's about what are the longer term opportunities for our learners, while also giving them kind of some of the short term opportunities. That's always, I think, a tension in terms of how do we be responsive, but make sure that we're really providing the greatest opportunities for not overcorrecting kind of because we hear the loudest voice in the room or very short term.
I firmly believe that a lot of employers are so fickle. So you can't really spend time. you do a survey and you ask employers what they want. They're going to want the world. They're going to tell you, I want these 95 things of this one employee. But if you were to take a survey of employees and you ask them, what are you doing in this job? They're doing about a quarter of what their employers ask for. So there's always disconnect there. And the challenge is really for us to figure out, okay, well, what is required for this job for those people to be successful? Because employers, by definition, you understand, you're going to want much more than you're paying for. And, that's your objective.
Yeah. And I think just focus on those transferable skills, given, things are changing rapidly and they'll continue to change rapidly in whatever kind of comes next. So we've got a couple of questions, and I'm sure your point about work-based learning is one that we are grappling with every single day, and I know is a huge challenge. And part of the angst over the low, the incredibly high unemployment for youth and teenagers is coupled with the work-based learning opportunities. Where are they getting those real-world experiences? So huge challenges for sure. There are a bunch of questions coming through. So a few focused on kind of some questions around, as there's been some ebbs and flows of employers and different associations coming together and saying, we're going to move away from requiring BAs. We're going to take more of a competency-based approach. and getting a sense of what really is required versus just what's the signal we're putting out. And so is that something that you've looked into? Is that something you see that conversation continuing, or is that kind of being superseded by we're in a crisis, so we're going to default back to the easiest proxy, which is just the BA?
Unfortunately, it's the latter. I've been seeing a lot more, with the crisis. We're just, because again, you think of, think of the employer as a fisherman. He's in a boat and there's a whole lot of fish in the sea, and he's going to pick the biggest ones, and mightn't be the best for whatever he's going to do right now. They might be overqualified or too much for him, but he's going to try to pick that because he has the option. And what I had said before is, in the long run, which is 2 or 3 years, that usually doesn't work out for them. I think one of the challenges here is that we know, and something I didn't speak about, we know that from the past 3 recessions, every single young person or any person who gets a job in this recession is going to experience what we call scarring. Okay, so what scarring is, you're going to take a wage that is significantly lower than the wage you would have gotten had you been employed in 2016 or 2017. Not only are you going to take this lower wage, but accumulated over the next 2 or 3 years, the cumulative impact of this lower wage will really affect your long-term earnings potential, because you will, the 10% bump you would have gotten will be a bump on a smaller number. So we understand that you're going to take a lower wage. Employers, from the employer's perspective, you're going to get more for less. Not only are you going to pay them a lower wage, but you're going to get a higher credential for that lower wage. Well, you're not going to get it for the long run, because when the economy comes back, those people are going to leave. And this is really the type of thing that we're working through. How do we, get employers to really take what they deserve and not necessarily ask for a bunch of credentials that are much more than they for those particular jobs. But you can't stop that. You can't prevent someone with a BA from doing a sub BA job. You can prevent someone with a master's from doing that job. What you can do is, what will happen is that person will eventually leave. And we're seeing that now, where, the graduating class of 2020, as an example, a lot of people had jobs in hand that were rescinded. They had offers in hand for jobs that were rescinded. And, people are holding off those offers and like, let's wait this out for a few months and see what happens. Well, that individual has to do something in the next few months. So they're going to pick up something else, might be in the contingency workforce or whatever, but that's not going to be your long-term goal.
So there was a question kind of building on this, is similar. So unfortunate answer, but I think the question was, is there anything that we can do as a field, as a community, as advocates to highlight the associates, the certifications, credentials that are of value, to try to kind of get ahead of this, or stop this further inflation of degrees and requirements?
Well, the only thing that makes a credential of value is the fact that the market is going to pay for it, right? That's the definition of the value. So I think what we need to do is our responsibility is to the students. I mean, as much as we want to try to encourage the employers, I don't think we can really beat that horse too much. Our responsibility is to students. So we need to let them know which are the credentials of value, which are the ones that have long-term developed pathways, which are the ones that have family sustaining earnings, which are the ones that give you a living wage. And a lot of people know that. I mean, for educators, they know. They just have a hard time being honest about those, because by definition, when you talk about credentials of value, you have to talk about those that don't have value, and people get all nervous about saying that. But it's our responsibility to say that and have the student make whatever is their ultimate decision based on that. So at the end of the day, especially in this particular market where people essentially might be coming to you with their chips, and they have to place their chips on one of these squares, they need to know which is the best bet for them. And we need to tell them what that is in terms of potential for that credential, where you can end up, what's the local labor market look like, where could you end up in 4 years, what are the career pathways that are available to you once you complete this. What else can you take as a next thing?
Great. I have one more question, but other people, please put them in because these have been great. So this one's a little wonky, I love wonky questions. So the question is, are you, Nicole, as an economist, are you factoring in the inflationary impact of the stimulus packages into the living wage projections? Or what do you think the impact on the middle scale wages might happen, you know, given the stimulus? And then obviously today there was an announcement earlier the Federal Reserve Board is kind of shifting their process for inflation. So do you see impact on wages, given, you know, we're aligning our programs to high skill, high wage and demand? Obviously that puts importance on understanding what that wage really is. That is a family sustaining wage.
Well, for the indicators, for the people who look at the living wage, you have to always, it's a moving marker, right? So you have two measures of wages. You have an absolute and you have a relative. The absolute measure would be like a poverty line. That's an index that's, you know, everyone is comparing it to one thing. Relative is relative to how, you know, the cost of living changes over time. What is that going to imply for, you know, what you need to get by? And of course, stimulus by definition is inflationary. Any type of money that you give to someone without, you know, productivity increases is inflationary. So we expect, you know, to have some impact of that. It matters where the stimulus goes. So sometimes if you give the stimulus to the people with the least amount of money, so at the bottom of the tail of the distribution, then they tend to have the highest marginal propensities to consume. So they tend to have the highest likelihood of, you know, putting that back into the economy immediately and consuming the highest proportion of that compared to somebody else who might save a significant amount. So with stimulus, we would expect, you know, us to need a little bit more in order to get by. But we did have a stimulus in 2008, right? We had a stimulus of close to $1 trillion. It wasn't exactly $1 trillion, but it was $1 trillion, you know, the Obama stimulus plan, and the economy was awash with money for a while, and interest rates fell, and, you know, there was a lot more movement and a lot more purchasing, and it leveled off, and it wasn't that bad for us in the long run. So I think Federal Reserve Chair is much more concerned about significant stagnation in the economy than he is about inflation, and he's willing to take that risk after doing a sufficient cost benefit analysis. He's willing to risk that inflation to make sure that we don't really you know, stagnate the way we did in 2008.
Great. I've got one last question, one that is of personal interest to me. So a question coming with the increase around teleworking and schools being remote. What are the skills that, you know, or I guess impact on the economy, but also impact on individuals, the skills for workers would they need to balance work and family responsibilities, and you know, any projections you have kind of longer term for what impact that might have?
I have no projections on it. But I tell you, we've been talking about it. We've been talking about it mostly from the perspective of gender, looking at women. And because by definition, the way our economy is set up, most of the child rearing responsibilities fall on women. Most of the elder care responsibility falls on women. And when you have all of these women who are now working from home, and their kids are at home, and you know, it's your responsibility to take care of your kids, there's that increased burden. So we know that we have no real solution to this yet. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of the relative relationship between the health of the economy, the actual health of the economy, and what that's going to do for economic outcomes. But you know, this teleworking is not, I think, 100% sustainable, even, you know, for the kids as well in the long term. We have to figure out how best to do this. So, you know, I've been having this conversation with family and friends, and whenever I say that, they're like, "Are you're going to put our kids to school or get them all sick?" It's like, no. But, you know, the economy must continue to run. You know, we still have to have jobs out there, and we still have to, if somebody's working, then, you know, if that person is working, their kids have to be somewhere while they're working. They have to be in daycare, they have to be in schools. So we really have to work out those things health-wise first before we can make any decision about what happens long-term. I think, you know, this teleworking situation, this coronavirus, has really transformed our economy permanently in the long run. Because you know, I used to telework personally 1 day a week, and that was a challenge for people. Oh, are you not coming on Wednesday? Oh, we need you on Wednesday. We need you on Wednesday. We have to see you. We have to physically see you. Well, all of a sudden, everybody doesn't have to physically see me, and we still get the work done. So we've proven that, you know, yeah, the necessity of the mother of all is the mother of all invention. But I just don't think that for the long run we can continue as is, and we really have to. I mean, something has to be done, vaccine-wise at least, over the next year or two, so we can get back to some sense of normalcy.
I think that's what we're all hoping for, and definitely agree. You know, shameless plug, we have a number of positions open that we have never explicitly hired people outside of the DC region because everyone needs to be in the office, and we are now opening up a nationwide application. So for those of you not in DC, those of you in DC, feel free to apply. Those of you outside, feel free also and pass the word around. Well, I'm gonna, this was wonderful. Nicole, thank you so much. Really, really terrific conversation, great information. I imagine you'll be getting follow-ups, and we'll certainly be following if it ever changes. And I'm very interested in seeing your 30-30 or 2030 projections and get a sense of what this really means and the, you know, kind of how it's going to accelerate, you know, further accelerate the automation, the AI, what that really means kind of for the breakdown. So maybe when we have that, we'll circle back with you. Thank you all for joining, for staying through this. This actually is our final in our summer learning series. So I want to thank my colleagues, Sarah, Brittany, others on the line for your work in pulling these together. As we shared, the recording as well as the slides will be up on our website, and we'll share them out with all of you soon. And hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Oh, before we leave, we're going to do a quick poll. So please, we love feedback. So please let us know how we did today. And after that, we'll see you again. We'll be in touch soon with our next round of webinar series, which will be kicking off in the fall. So we'll see you all then.